You can wait outside, Miss Brooks. People like you clean the room after history is made. Richard Calloway said it without raising his voice, which somehow made it colder. The words slipped through the polished glass doorway of the 28th floor boardroom and landed on Naomi Brooks like ice water under her collar. She stood there in a navy cleaning uniform, one hand wrapped around the metal handle of her mop bucket, the other holding a folded stack of fresh towels she had been told to bring just in case the executives needed anything. Behind Richard, 12 people in tailored suits sat around a table long enough to look like a runway. Silver pens waited beside leather folders. Bottled water caught the ceiling lights. At the far end, the skyline of Chicago glowed pale blue through the windows, Lake Michigan stretching beyond the towers like a sheet of cold steel. Naomi had been cleaning Calloway Tower for 11 months, long enough to know which executives looked through her and which ones looked past her. Richard did both. He was tall, white-haired at the temples, handsome in the expensive, exhausted way of men who believed stress was proof of importance. His gray suit fit like armor. His watch probably cost more than Naomi's car. He did not look angry when he blocked her from entering. He looked inconvenienced, as if her body in the doorway had briefly interrupted the movement of money. I was told to set water by the side table, Naomi said quietly. Her voice was steady, but her fingers tightened around the towels. Inside the room, Victor Hale smiled from his chair, smooth and bright, a man with a tan too even for February and a tie the color of dried wine. He leaned back as if the entire scene amused him. I think the room has enough help, he said, and a few people lowered their eyes, not quite laughing, not quite brave enough to object. Richard glanced at Naomi's badge, though he knew her name. Leave the towels with security. Wait in the hall until we're finished. No one goes in or out once we begin. Then he stepped back and let the glass door swing shut. The soft click of the latch was smaller than a slap and somehow louder. Naomi remained where she was, surrounded by the sterile smell of lemon polish, printer ink, and expensive carpet. Through the glass, she could see Richard take his seat at the head of the table. She could see Eleanor Pierce, the company's chief legal officer, open a thick contract marked final execution copy. She could see Victor slide one document forward with 2 fingers, smiling like a man offering a gift he already knew was poisoned. Naomi lowered the towels onto a narrow console table beside the wall. Her cheeks burned, but she did not move away. She had learned a long time ago that humiliation had a temperature. It started hot in the face, moved cold into the hands, then settled somewhere behind the ribs where words could either rot or become steel. She looked down at the floor she had mopped before sunrise, so clean it reflected the boardroom lights in thin white lines. Men like Richard Calloway loved reflections. They liked marble, glass, chrome, anything that showed them a world without fingerprints. But Naomi knew fingerprints always came back. They lived on door handles, on elevator buttons, on the edges of pages people thought no one else would read. Inside, Richard uncapped his pen. Eleanor turned to page 1. Victor's smile widened by half an inch. And Naomi Brooks, ordered to wait outside like furniture in the hallway, watched the most powerful man in the building move closer to the one mistake that would cost him everything. Naomi did not leave the hallway because leaving was what people expected from her. She stayed beside the console table with her mop bucket tucked close to the wall, quiet enough to become part of the building again, just another dark shape beneath the white ceiling lights. That was how she had survived most of her life, by noticing what louder people missed. At 29, she had the stillness of someone who had learned early that attention could become a burden. She had grown up on the South Side with a mother who worked double shifts as a nurse at St. Agnes Medical Center and still came home smelling like antiseptic, peppermint gum, and tired love. Her mother, Ruth Brooks, used to tell her that a clean floor was not proof of small work. It was proof somebody cared enough to make a place safer for strangers. Naomi believed that for years. She believed it when she scrubbed diner counters after high school, when she folded laundry at the clinic, when she earned a scholarship to study legal studies at Loyola and sat in lecture halls with a used laptop, a cracked phone, and a hunger that made every page feel alive. She loved the way law tried to pin truth to paper. She loved clauses, definitions, exceptions, the tiny words that could protect a family or ruin one. Professors remembered her because she asked questions nobody expected. Classmates borrowed her notes. One instructor told her she had the mind for corporate compliance, maybe even trial law, if she wanted it badly enough. Naomi did want it. Then her mother got sick. The bills came first in envelopes, then in calls, then in the quiet shutting of doors Naomi had not known were open. She dropped from full-time to part-time, then from part-time to nothing at all. Her textbooks went into a plastic storage bin under her bed. Her campus identification card expired. Ruth passed on a rainy Tuesday morning before sunrise, and Naomi learned that grief did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like dust, settling over every surface until even breathing felt like disturbing something fragile. After that, cleaning work was not shameful. It was rent. It was groceries. It was keeping her younger cousin in school for one more semester. It was bus fare in winter and a used Honda Civic that coughed whenever the temperature dropped below 20 degrees. Callaway Tower paid better than most places and offered health insurance after 6 months. So Naomi took the job, tied her hair back, learned the service elevators, and trained herself not to flinch when executives spoke around her as if she were a lamp. She cleaned conference rooms after mergers collapsed. She emptied trash cans full of printed drafts marked confidential. She wiped coffee rings from documents discussing layoffs, acquisitions, settlements, and bonuses large enough to buy the apartment building where she lived. And because old habits did not die just because dreams were postponed, she read what crossed her path when it was already discarded, not to steal, not to interfere, but because her mind still reached for meaning the way some hands reached for prayer. That morning, standing outside the sealed boardroom, while Richard Callaway prepared to gamble with thousands of jobs, Naomi heard the low murmur of men discussing risk as if risk had no faces. She looked at the towels beside her, folded so neatly no one would notice them unless they needed one. For a moment, she thought of her mother's hands smoothing hospital sheets around patients who never learned her name. Then the copier near the service alcove beeped twice. A paper jam light blinked red. Naomi turned toward it, grateful for something to do with her hands, unaware that the machine had just held back the one page everyone inside needed to see. The copier stood in the service alcove like a tired animal, humming under fluorescent light while a thin strip of paper trembled between its rollers. Naomi opened the tray, pressed the release tab, and eased the stuck sheet free with 2 careful fingers. It was warm from the machine, slightly curled at the edges, the black ink still sharp enough to smell. At the top, in bold capital letters, were the words Callaway Industries Strategic Recovery Agreement. Naomi froze for half a breath. She knew enough not to stare too long at documents that did not belong to her, but the page number in the bottom corner caught her eye before she could look away. Page 14. The same page Eleanor Pierce had not yet reached inside the boardroom. Naomi set the sheet face down on the copier glass and glanced through the narrow gap between the service alcove and the hallway. No one was watching her. The security guard by the boardroom door was scrolling through messages on his phone. The executives inside were sealed behind glass, their voices reduced to a low, expensive murmur. Richard Callaway sat at the head of the table, back straight, pen in hand, pretending he was not desperate. But Naomi had cleaned his office at midnight enough times to know what desperation looked like when it wore a custom suit. She had seen the empty coffee cups lined beside his laptop, the legal pads covered in hard slashes of handwriting. The framed newspaper article turned face down after Callaway Industries lost its federal supply contract. The company had been bleeding for months. 3,000 workers across Illinois, Ohio, and Pennsylvania were waiting on the outcome of this meeting without knowing it. Factory crews, warehouse drivers, payroll clerks, people who did not sit at long tables but still carried the weight of decisions made there. Richard had built his public image on control. He appeared on business shows with calm eyes and a steel voice. He told shareholders that fear was a tax paid by the unprepared. He donated to museums, spoke at universities, and had his name carved into the lobby downstairs in brushed silver letters. Yet inside the boardroom that morning, his control was thinner than glass. Victor Hale knew it. He watched Richard the way a card player watched a man who had already lost more than he could admit. Victor was white, polished, and almost gentle in the way he moved, which made him more dangerous. He did not push. He invited. He did not threaten. He reassured. His company, Hale Meridian Group, had appeared at the exact moment Callaway needed rescue, offering financing, acquisition support, and regulatory protection in language so clean it sounded merciful. Eleanor Pierce had reviewed the agreement for weeks, but even she looked worn down by the speed of it. Her silver reading glasses sat low on her nose. Her lips moved silently over sentences as if prayer and legal review had become the same thing. Naomi looked back at the page in her hand. She told herself to place it in the output tray and step away. Then her eyes fell on a single sentence buried halfway down the page, Clause 7, subsection C. The words seemed harmless at first, smooth and official, but something inside her went still. Emergency transfer of liability shall become effective upon execution and apply retroactively to all undisclosed obligations connected to prior operational exposure. Naomi read it once. Then again, the hallway noise thinned. The air from the vent touched the damp cuff of her uniform. Retroactively, undisclosed obligations. Upon execution. Those were not rescue words. They were trap words. Inside the boardroom, Richard turned to Eleanor and asked, "Are we clear to sign?" Eleanor hesitated, only for a second. Victor smiled before she could answer. Naomi lifted the warm page in both hands, and the distance between the service alcove and the boardroom suddenly felt longer than any hallway in America. Naomi took one step toward the boardroom and stopped because every rule in the building rose up inside her at once. Do not interrupt executives. Do not touch active files. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make yourself larger than the job printed on your badge. The paper trembled slightly in her hand, not from fear alone, but from the weight of knowing. Through the glass, she saw Richard lean forward as Eleanor slid the signature packet toward him. The silver pen in his hand caught the light like a small blade of certainty. Victor Hale adjusted his cuff and watched with that calm, polished smile. The security guard lifted his eyes when Naomi moved closer. "Ma'am, you need to stay back," he said, low enough not to disturb the room. Naomi did not argue with him. She simply held up the page. "They are missing this." He glanced at the paper, then at her uniform, and his expression settled into the tired patience of someone deciding she was confused. "You can leave it at the desk." "No," Naomi said, and the word surprised even her. It came out quiet, clean, final. "He needs to see it before he signs." The guard stepped slightly in front of the door. "This meeting is closed." Inside, Richard placed the pen tip near the first signature line. Naomi felt the hallway narrow around her. The lemon polish, the cold vent air, the muffled voices, the bright white lines reflected on the floor, all of it pressed against her ribs. She thought of the factories whose break rooms she had never seen, the drivers warming their hands around gas station coffee before dawn, the payroll clerks who would receive the first wave of panic if this went wrong. Then she thought of her mother reading hospital forms at the kitchen table, circling words she did not understand because nobody had explained them until it was too late. Naomi stepped around the guard before he could decide how firmly to stop her and placed her palm flat against the glass. The sound was small, but in that sealed room it carried like a knock from another world. One head turned, then another. Eleanor looked up first, her glasses flashing. Richard's pen paused. Victor's smile thinned but did not vanish. The guard whispered, "Miss Brooks," with warning in his voice, but Naomi kept her eyes on Richard. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, yet her voice, when she spoke through the narrow seam of the door, remained steady. "Sir, page 14 does not save your company. It buries it." The room went still, not silent at first, because machines kept humming, a chair creaked, a pen rolled against a folder. But the people stopped. Richard stared at her as if the glass had insulted him. Eleanor's hand froze above the contract. Victor leaned back slowly, folding his fingers together. "Excuse me," Richard said, each syllable controlled. Naomi opened the door just enough for her voice to enter clearly. Clause 7, subsection C. The emergency transfer language is retroactive. If you sign, Callaway accepts liability for obligations Hale Meridian has not disclosed yet. A board member near the window blinked. Another pulled his copy closer. Eleanor's face tightened, but pride held her still. Richard stood, not quickly, not loudly, but with the full force of a man used to making people shrink by rising from his chair. "This is not your place." Naomi swallowed. Her hand still smelled faintly of paper dust and disinfectant. "I know where I work, Mr. Callaway." Her gaze flicked to the page, then back to him. But words do not change meaning because of who reads them. Victor gave a soft laugh. Are we really delaying a $900 million recovery agreement because the cleaning staff skimmed a page by the copier? Heat moved through Naomi's face, but she did not lower her eyes. She slid the page across the threshold onto the carpet, careful, respectful, as if placing evidence before a court. Line 22, she said. Read it before you sign. For 3 seconds, no one moved. Toward the paper. It lay just inside the boardroom, like something dirty tracked in from the service hallway. Richard stared at it, then at Naomi, and the muscles along his jaw tightened with a control so strict it looked almost painful. Eleanor Pierce did not pick it up either. Her hand rested on the open contract, her silver glasses catching the light, but her eyes had shifted to the exact place Naomi had named. Victor Hale broke the silence first with a soft, practiced sigh. Richard, we have all reviewed the agreement. Your counsel has reviewed it. My counsel has reviewed it. I respect hardworking people, but this is not a community college debate. A few faces turned away, embarrassed by the sharpness hidden under his politeness. Naomi felt the words land, one by one, against the old bruises of her life, the ones no one could see because they were made of doors closing, applications unanswered, smiles that changed after reading her name, interviews that ended the moment she walked in. Richard stepped around the table, crossed the carpet, and stopped a few feet from the threshold. The glass door remained half open between them. Miss Brooks, he said, using her name now only because he wanted it to sound like a warning. This company is in the middle of a confidential transaction. You had no authorization to inspect, interpret, or interrupt anything related to it. Naomi kept her shoulders square. The page jammed in the copier. I saw one line. You saw what you wanted to see, he replied. No, sir. I saw what it says. The room drew in a breath. Eleanor's eyes flickered at that, but she still did not speak. Victor smiled again, colder now. Does she have legal training? He asked, not looking at Naomi but at Richard, as if she were a problem on a report. Richard's expression hardened. She is a cleaner. The sentence did not need anything added to it. It carried its own verdict. Naomi felt the heat rise in her throat, but she held it there, refusing to let it become tears. The security guard moved closer behind her, uncertain, his hand hovering near his radio. Ma'am, let us step back. Naomi did not resist, but she did not turn away. Please, she said, and that one word almost cost her more than courage had. Just read line 22. Richard bent, picked up the sheet at last, and for a moment hope flashed through her, small and dangerous. But he did not read it. He folded it once, slowly, then handed it back through the doorway as if returning a misplaced receipt. You are done here. The paper touched Naomi's fingers. It was still warm in places from the copier. Mr. Calloway, Eleanor said carefully from the table. Perhaps we should verify the page before proceeding. Victor turned his head toward her, the smile gone for the first time. Richard looked back, irritation cutting through his calm. Eleanor, are you telling me my own chief legal officer missed something that a member of the cleaning staff found in passing? The question was not really a question. It was a trap of pride, and Eleanor heard it. She lowered her eyes to the contract, her mouth pressed into a thin line. I am saying verification would take less than a minute. Victor gave a light laugh. And cost us momentum. Markets open in 40 minutes. My financing window will not stay open forever. That moved the room more than Naomi's warning had. Money had a voice here. Deadlines had authority. Fear wore a better suit than truth. Richard turned back to Naomi with a look that made the hallway colder. Escort her downstairs. Human resources will handle the rest. The guard's face tightened with discomfort, but he stepped beside her. Naomi looked once at Eleanor, then at the board members, then at Richard's pen still waiting near the signature line. She did not beg. She did not shout. She only unfolded the paper, smoothed the crease with her thumb, and held it up so the black line of text faced the room. Retroactive, she said softly. That is the word you are ignoring. Then she stepped back into the hallway, carrying her warning with her while the door swung shut again. The hallway swallowed Naomi in a kind of silence that felt heavier than noise. The security guard walked beside her but did not touch her, his steps careful on the polished stone, his radio quiet at his shoulder. Behind them, the boardroom door had closed again, sealing. Away the faces, the leather chairs, the bottled water, and the silver pen waiting beside a decision. Naomi could still see the room through the glass wall as they moved past it, but now the executives looked distant, softened by reflection, like figures inside an aquarium. Richard was standing at the head of the table again. Victor Hale was speaking, one palm open, his mouth moving with calm urgency. Eleanor Pierce had not turned the page. That was the detail Naomi noticed. The chief legal officer sat very still, eyes lowered, one hand resting on the contract, as if she were holding it in place before it could run away from her. Naomi's own hand tightened around the folded sheet. The paper had bent at the corners where her fingers gripped it too hard. Line 22 was hidden now, pressed against her palm, but the word remained bright in her mind. Retroactive. It rang there with the dull certainty of a church bell heard from far away. At the service elevator, the guard pressed the down button and cleared his throat. "I am sorry," he said quietly, not looking at her. Naomi glanced at his reflection in the elevator doors. He was young, maybe 24, with tired eyes and a name tag that read Marcus. He looked ashamed in the private way people do when they have obeyed an order they did not believe in. "You are doing your job," Naomi said. "That does not always make it right," he murmured. The elevator did not arrive. Somewhere above them, cables hummed through the shaft. The air smelled like cold metal, floor wax, and the faint burnt scent from the copier. Naomi stared at the closed doors until her reflection became clearer. Navy uniform, soft curls pinned back, brown hands holding a page nobody wanted to read. For a moment, she saw herself the way the building saw her, a woman meant to move around the edges, to appear after spills, to disappear before applause. Then she saw her mother at the kitchen table, tracing medical language with a yellow highlighter, whispering that people hide cruelty inside polite words because polite words do not look guilty. Naomi closed her eyes and breathed in slowly. She did not feel powerful. She felt tired. She felt small. She felt the heat of humiliation cooling into something steadier. Not anger. Not revenge. A different thing. Refusal. The elevator chimed, but before the doors opened, a sound came from the boardroom. Not loud. Just a chair sliding back too sharply across carpet. Naomi turned. Through the glass, Eleanor Pierce was on her feet. Richard was looking at her now, his pen still uncapped. Victor had stopped smiling. The entire room seemed to tilt toward page 14. Marcus followed Naomi's gaze and did not press the elevator button again. Naomi stood under the white hallway lights, the folded paper resting against her chest, and for the first time since Richard had closed the door on her, the silence belonged to someone else. Eleanor Pierce did not raise her voice, but every person in the boardroom heard her. "Richard, stop." The pen froze less than an inch above the signature line. Richard looked at her as if she had spoken in a language he did not permit inside his company. Victor Hale's face remained smooth, but the skin around his eyes tightened. "Eleanor," Richard said, "we are past this." "No," she answered, and this time her hand moved to page 14. "We are exactly at this." Naomi stood near the service elevator, watching through the glass with Marcus beside her. She could not hear every word. Only fragments carried through the narrow seam where the door had not fully settled into its frame, but she saw enough. Eleanor turned the contract toward herself, found the clause, then leaned closer. One board member stood behind her chair. Another pulled out his reading glasses. Richard remained upright, irritated, impatient, trying to hold the room together by posture alone. Victor spoke quickly, one hand raised in reassurance, but Eleanor no longer looked at him. She read the line once, then reached for the appendix binder. The room changed by inches. A shoulder stiffened. A mouth opened and closed. Someone near the window whispered something Naomi could not hear. Richard finally lowered the pen. Eleanor took a yellow tab from her folder and marked the page. Then she reached for a second binder. The due diligence schedule Victor's team had delivered only that morning. Her fingers moved faster now. Page numbers turned. Paper whispered. The sound reached the hallway like dry leaves scraping across concrete. Naomi felt her pulse slow, not because the danger had passed, but because truth had entered the room and demanded space. Eleanor stopped on a supplemental disclosure page and went pale. Even from the hallway, Naomi saw it. Richard saw it too. "What is it?" he asked. Eleanor did not answer immediately. She turned the binder around and pointed to a reference code buried under a list of legacy obligations. Richard leaned down. Victor's chair shifted backward by a few inches. That exposure was excluded, Victor said, too quickly. It is immaterial to the recovery structure. Eleanor looked at him for the first time with the cold clarity of a woman who had just found the knife hidden in the flowers. It is not excluded. It is transferred, retroactively, to us. The words moved through the room like a power outage. One by one, faces lost their confidence. Richard picked up the page Naomi had returned, unfolded it, and finally read line 22 for himself. His eyes did not move for a long moment. Then they moved again, slower, as if he needed the sentence to betray him twice before he believed it. Victor began speaking, but Richard lifted one hand. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to silence him. Naomi watched the man who had sent her away stand over the contract with his pen still in his hand, and for the first time that morning, he looked less like a chief executive officer than a person standing at the edge of a hole he had almost stepped into. Eleanor spoke again, softer now. If you sign, Callaway assumes undisclosed liabilities tied to Hale Meridian's prior operations. Litigation, debt, regulatory exposure, everything that should have remained with them. A board member swore under his breath, then caught himself. Another pushed his chair back and covered his mouth. Richard turned to Victor. You knew? Victor's smile tried to return and failed halfway. Richard, complicated agreements require trust. Richard looked down at page 14, then through the glass toward the hallway. His eyes found Naomi. She did not lift her chin in victory. She did not smile. She simply stood there in her cleaner's uniform, holding herself together under the white lights, while the room that had dismissed her learned how expensive arrogance could be. Richard did not sign. The pen came down on the table with a small sound, but it carried across the room like a door closing on the wrong future. This meeting is suspended, he said. Victor Hale stood at once, his calm cracking at the edges. Richard, do not let a misunderstanding destroy a recovery package your company needs. Richard did not look at him. He looked at Eleanor. Lock every document. Copy legal. Notify outside counsel. No one from Hale Meridian leaves with company materials. Eleanor was already moving, her phone in one hand, her voice low and sharp as she gave instructions. The boardroom shifted from ceremony to emergency in less than a minute. Laptops opened. Folders closed. A junior counsel hurried in with a tablet. Victor's people began gathering their papers too quickly, and that was when Richard finally turned toward the hallway. Miss Brooks, he called. The sound of her name through the glass made Naomi's stomach tighten. Marcus stepped aside, and Naomi walked back to the doorway with the folded page still in her hand. No one laughed now. No one looked through her. The same executives who had watched her humiliation a few minutes earlier now watched her, as if the room had been built around a truth she had carried in from the service alcove. Richard's face had changed. Not softened exactly. Something harder than arrogance had broken, leaving behind a man who could finally feel the weight of his own mistake. How did you understand that clause? He asked. Naomi looked at the table, the contracts, the silver pen, then at him. I studied legal writing before I left school. Eleanor stepped closer. Where? Loyola, Naomi said. I had to drop out when my mother got sick. The words were simple, but the silence after them was not. Eleanor glanced down at the supplemental disclosure again, then froze on a reference line. Richard, she said slowly, one of these legacy claims is connected to St. Agnes Medical Center, the insurance collapse case from 8 years ago. Naomi's breath caught before she could stop it. The room blurred at the edges. St. Agnes was where Ruth Brooks had worked for 19 years, where her benefits were frozen during a corporate restructuring nobody explained, where paperwork became delay, delay became denial, and denial became a hospital bed Naomi could not afford without selling the last pieces of her future. Eleanor read further, her voice quieter now. Hale Meridian was involved in the administrative outsourcing agreement. Victor's face went pale under the boardroom lights. Naomi did not move. Her mother's name was not on the page, but it might as well have been. Every unpaid bill, every appeal letter, every night Naomi spent choosing between tuition and medication seemed to rise from the carpet and stand beside her. Richard saw it. For once, he did not reach for authority. He reached for humility, slowly, as if it were unfamiliar. Miss Brooks, he said. Naomi, I owe you an apology. Not only for this meeting, for the way I spoke to you. For the way I saw you. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. There were many things she could have said. She could have made him smaller. She could have turned the room against him with one sentence. Instead, she held the page out to Eleanor. I was not trying to embarrass anyone, she said. I was trying to keep people from getting hurt by words they did not see. Richard lowered his eyes. Victor said nothing. Outside the windows, Chicago traffic moved far below like a restless current. Naomi's hands were still cold, but her voice was steady. If you want to make this right, do not start with me. Start with the workers whose names never make it into rooms like this. Start with my mother's file. Start with every family that was told a hidden clause mattered more than their lives. Richard nodded once, and this time, no one mistook silence for power. By the following Monday, the 28th floor no longer sounded the same. The boardroom doors were open, not wide, not dramatic, just open enough for the morning light to spill into the hallway and touch the strip of polished stone where Naomi Brooks had once been told to wait. The recovery agreement with Hale Meridian was gone, removed from the table, archived for investigators, and replaced by neat stacks of reviewed files tied with blue legal bands. Victor Hale was not there. His chair had been taken away before sunrise, leaving a small empty space that made the room feel cleaner than it had when Naomi first mopped it. Outside counsel had confirmed the trap. Federal regulators had been notified. More important to Naomi, Callaway Industries had begun reopening the St. Agnes Medical Center files, starting with benefit denials, outsourced insurance decisions, and families who had spent years believing their pain had vanished into paperwork. Ruth Brooks's name was near the top of the first folder. Naomi had seen it that morning in Eleanor Pierce's office, typed in black ink, plain and undeniable. For a long time, she had only rested her fingertips on the page. She did not cry. She simply breathed, the way people breathe when a locked room inside them finally gets a window. Richard Callaway found her later near the service alcove, where the copier had been repaired and the red paper jam light was dark. He did not arrive with cameras. He did not bring flowers. He did not make a speech for the staff gathered behind glass walls, pretending not to look. He stood a few feet away, holding a slim folder and a white visitor badge turned face down in his palm. Naomi, he said, and this time her name sounded like a name, not a correction. She turned from the copier. Her uniform was still navy, her shoes still practical, her hands still smelled faintly of citrus cleaner. Richard looked at the floor, then at the boardroom. I cannot undo what I said. Naomi said nothing. But I can make sure this building does not keep rewarding people for pretending they do not see who keeps it standing. He handed her the folder. Inside was not a check. It was a written offer for a paid compliance fellowship, tuition support to return to Loyola, and a formal review program for overlooked workers with professional training the company had never bothered to ask about. Naomi read every line slowly. She noticed Eleanor's initials at the bottom, then Richard's signature beneath them. This is not charity, he said. No, Naomi answered quietly. It had better not be. For the first time, Richard almost smiled, but he did not take the easy comfort of it. He only nodded. 1 week later, Naomi entered the boardroom through the main door. The long table had been wiped clean, though not by her. A nameplate waited beside the third chair from Eleanor's seat. Naomi Brooks, Compliance Analyst Fellow. No one applauded. No one needed to. Richard stood when she entered, then the others followed, not because power demanded it, but because truth had walked in wearing steady shoes. Naomi sat down and opened the folder marked St. Agnes Review. Sunlight moved across the glass, across the polished table, across page 14 resting quietly on top of the file. Her mother's old yellow highlighter lay beside it, brought from home, its plastic worn smooth by years of use. Naomi uncapped it, drew one careful line beneath the first sentence, and the room remained silent enough to hear the soft sound of justice beginning again.